This man truly owns a money plant that grows not rupees but actual dollars. Thanks to this plant, his life becomes luxurious. He buys a brand new sports car and upgrades his lifestyle significantly. However, one day, the plant suddenly stops growing dollars, as if someone has cursed it. Paul, desperate to restore it, tries various rituals, including reading the Bible near the plant, but nothing works. One day, he meets an old man who reveals the secret to making the plant grow dollars again. Will Paul be able to revive the magic of the plant? Let's dive into the detailed explanation of the film to find out. The film begins with Paul, a struggling real estate agent whose business is in trouble. One day, he receives news that his wealthy uncle has passed away. Paul is excited because, as the only heir, he stands to inherit all of his uncle's estate. However, the lawyer informs him of something shocking. His uncle has left all his property to a trust and has only left Paul a plant. This news devastates Paul, feeling as if his uncle's actions are a huge betrayal. Outraged by his uncle's decision, Paul places the plant in the storeroom. The next day, when he goes to water it, he is astonished to find that dollar bills are growing on the plant. Confused but intrigued, Paul decides to take advantage of this free money, watering the plant daily and collecting the dollars that appear. One day, his uncle's friend Tim visits Paul and asks for a small donation. Paul, in a good mood due to his newfound wealth, writes a check for $1,000 on the spot, shocking his family who are used to his stingy nature. He also gives his children $200 each and tells them that he has sold a lot of properties that month. Paul upgrades his lifestyle with the money from the plant, buying a new suit, a car, and even a grass-cutting machine. However, when he buys the car and pays in cash, the salesman calls the tax authorities, as the payment is suspicious and must be reported according to tax regulations. The tax officer begins to keep an eye on Paul. A few days later, Tim returns to ask for another donation, but this time, Paul is in a bad mood and angrily dismisses him. The next day, the plant stops growing dollars. On top of that, the tax officer visits Paul's house to inquire about his financial activities, questioning his wife for a long time. She defends him, claiming that Paul is an honest real estate agent whose business is going well. The officer then visits Paul's workplace, where she learns that he hasn't sold any properties in months. Her suspicion turns into certainty that Paul must be involved in some illegal activity. Meanwhile, Paul is upset because the plant has stopped producing dollars. He starts to suspect that someone has cursed the plant. To make amends for his rude behavior, he goes to Tim and apologizes, giving him a large donation. Before leaving, Tim advises Paul to give his money to those who need it. Paul decides to follow Tim's advice and gives more money to people in need. However, as soon as Paul leaves, the tax officer arrives and finds the piles of cash on the table. She immediately believes that Paul is involved in illegal activities. That night, Paul sits by the plant, reading spells and even the Bible, hoping to reverse the curse, but to no avail. The next day, the officer sees Paul giving $100 to a homeless person on the street. This action leads her to believe even more that Paul is involved in a criminal enterprise. The lady officer begins to suspect that Paul is involved in illegal activities, possibly even dealing drugs. She arrests him and takes him in for further investigation. That evening, Paul is desperate to get home in time for his son's important football match, but his phone is constantly off. His wife and daughter, worried about him, go to one of his properties, where they accidentally fall into a hole Paul had covered with a cloth. His daughter falls and fractures her arm. Paul rushes to the hospital as quickly as he can. Meanwhile, his colleague Jack scolds him for not handling his work properly. This incident makes Paul realize the true importance of family over money. The next day, the tax officer arrests Paul for being involved in illegal activities. Both Paul and Tim end up in the same jail, though in separate cells. Tim then reveals the full story behind the plant. He explains that he was the one who first found the plant and gave it to Paul's uncle when he was going through a tough financial time. However, with the wealth the plant brought, his uncle's greed grew. Tim also explains that after receiving some guidance, his uncle started sharing his wealth with those in need, and that Paul had done the right thing by following this path as well. After some time, the lady officer arrives and releases both Paul and Tim. Jack, who had been investigating them, gives a statement to the officer, explaining that they had recently sold a major property in New York, and the money Paul was using came from this sale, which was actually handled by Jack. In the final scenes, Tim's organization arranges a fundraising event for orphan children, where Paul's whole family is invited. Paul delivers a heartfelt speech about how donating money to those in need can help grow one's business and income, just as it had helped the plant continue to produce dollars. The film ends with Paul spending quality time with his family, reaffirming the film's core message about the importance of family and generosity over material wealth.